Alright, welcome to the video. Today we're going to talk about something a little bit on the dry side. We're going to talk about hammers. When we're working with metal, uh, using the right type of hammer usually is important. If I was going to be using uh, steel, for example, I would be using a very high-tempered, high-quality hammer. And I don't mind spending, upwards of 50, 80, $100 for that hammer. When I'm working with softer metals, though, I don't think I need to pay $60 for a hammer. Or I've seen metalworking hammers and air chasing hammers for copper go for as much as 120 bucks for one hammer. The simple fact of the matter is that if you can do copper work with the cheapest hammer, a hunk of wood, and some time, uh, because it is a very, very, very soft metal. Aluminum is a soft metal, tin is a soft metal. I regularly do a lot of tint prints using nothing but scribe tools because the material is so soft and so thin at that point. So using a hammer that costs a whole lot of money, the only difference comes in really the finishing. And that, what you're paying for is how smooth of a head you get on this. Let me show you an example here. When you use a cheap hammer with copper, this is extremely textured from the tooling. Just like every other ball peen hammer I've ever bought, these are all sand cast and then ground down, powder coated, and then ground down to a final finish. Um, the only difference between this being a $20 hammer from say like Home Depot or anywhere else, and being a $2 hammer from Harbor Freight is how much they grind and finish the ends on here. And Home Depot largely they don't finish the ends either, so I still have to do the same work. But for the most part, if I use the hammer as is, this is such a rough grind that there will actually be texture in my hammer strikes, in copper, in aluminum, in a few other things. So I need to do some finishing work on this. And this is the only difference between this being a $2 hammer and say a $20 air chasing hammer is how much I smooth and finish this. Also, this side isn't flat, so I'll go over what I'm going to do with that. For this, we just need some wet dry sandpaper. I've already spent about 30 seconds already polishing off the edge here, but I haven't done it to the side. So let me see if I can force the camera to zoom in on that. Sort of doing it. You see it right up here, how you can see how matted finish that is, and you see the grind shapes. It's the same thing over here on the head. And it gets to the point where it's almost ridiculous about how much texture actually translates to copper, but it also makes sense because it almost embosses into that texture. So what we're going to do is use some wet dry sandpaper, get a little bit wet, and you just polish the head. And this might take some time. I mean, it's just what you're doing is you're getting all the big stuff off. If you have something that's too big, too deep, a little bit of work will get it out as well. You're not really going for a completely smooth shine. And you still got to maintain this the same amount as you would if you bought a really expensive hammer, because you'll have to make sure all the heads are completely smooth and filed and ground and polished back out again. And if you're like me, a small hammer is I can't grip small hammers. So I get the big hammers because it gives me a little bit more oomph. You work a little bit less because you don't have to swing so hard physically. The hammer does a lot of the work. And so, you notice right here, you can actually see a mirror finish starting to pick up, even in this non-spa state. And so this right here, probably a minute's worth of time so far already polishing it. I'll probably spend about a good solid 10 minutes using wet dry sandpaper and a file to smooth out some of the inconsistencies in the casting, and then keep grinding and doing some other stuff to it. But this back of this head is already perfect for most copper work that I'll be doing. Now onto the head. This says that this is a tempered steel hammer. I don't believe this is tempered steel. I believe that it's tempered in the fact that they probably took it and quelched it after they ground it, like after they probably heated it up one more time and then quelched it, so it's tempered. But it's if I hit this against steel, I'm pretty sure this will deform. This is not a last forever hammer if you're going to be hammering in hard steels and stuff like that. This is a epitome of a $2 hammer. So I can go ahead and grind this down. I'm probably going to take this one and file it flat, so I need one smooth hammer. It's going to be completely flat. I'm probably going to get 2 or 3 other hammers because I need to modify out the hammers. And I don't want to modify out a $20 hammer. I'll modify out a $2 hammer. One of which will have a nice straight flat area because I don't need a big sledgehammer. I just need something small, which creates a little small area here where it will cause the metal when I hit it to expand out that way. Round parts expand out in all directions. This one just flattens down and it takes most of the impact. So I'll make one that's straight, and I'll probably also texture one. I'm not sure of the texture, but whatever that texture is, it'll be for adding lots of pattern fast onto copper or any sort of other metal I use. On the back side, I don't need 3 ball peens the same size. And in fact, I need to have 2 distinct ball peens. One comes more to a point where it's still slightly rounded, so it's still got that high impact point out here with the weight behind it. But I also need one that's also going to be a smaller ball peen. So I'll probably take one, grind it down to about half its size, and then completely smoothly round it out. So I get a nice dome shape of a head. And the other one will come about half the size to a sharper point. Still just have a slight round to it. I don't want to go for a piercing strike. I need to go with a dappled strike. But it's a very small change to these hammers, but it'll be worth it. And then afterwards, I'll go through those videos too when I go to grinding out a hammer. But this video was all about polishing that head because I have copper work that I struck with a hammer a couple years ago, and I use it as an example for people like close up where you could see how a cheap hammer patterned out all across it. It looks like some like cat scratches all across it, like deep cuts. And it was all because I just grabbed a hammer from my garage and I didn't realize that I had been using it to like hit concrete, and it was like a scraping motion as it struck, so like that, and it had ground deep recesses into the hammer, and I had been putting all those hammer strikes into it, so it basically made for work that was unusable for any sort of elegant use. So keep that in mind when you're working with copper, is that anything that's on your metal as a harder metal will translate to your work, whether that's a scratch, an indent, anything. So if you wanted to make sure that your work is completely flat and then you hammer something that has an indent into it, you'll see that indent. So that's my little PSA for today.